Finally, I am the only haired member of the panel. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Makin Sense, South Africa and the world's best news podcast and the Common Sense's flagship podcast. In this show, we gather a panel of brilliant South Africans who live scattered around the world to discuss the most important South African and global news stories and ideas. What a show we have ahead of us today! We are looking ahead to the coming year as each of our panelists have picked out a couple of stories, ideas, or events that they think are going to be crucial in shaping the world over the next year. But before we get to all of that, let me introduce you to our panel of brilliant South Africans from across the globe. Joining us from Germany, where he is effortlessly keeping his band's beat, the director of the Bremen Democracy Research Group, the Udo Lindenberg of Lilienthal, James Myberg. From Germany, we head across the Atlantic to the US as we are joined by the director of the Yorktown Foundation for Freedom, who is donning his bedazzled spandex. He is the Elvis Presley of Rock Creek Park, Richard Tren. And we are finally off to South Africa, from where we are joined by two panelists today. The first of these is revving to go with his scissor kick. He is the host of the State of the Nation podcast, which is linked in the description of this video. He is also a great friend of the show, the Johnny Clegg of Constantia Kloof, Mike Sham. And the second panelist in South Africa is the Common Sense's editor, who is currently on the lookout for an Eland vol Macy's. He is the founder of France Crenier Private Clients, the Kurt Darren of Kensington, France Crenier. And ladies and gentlemen, as always, I am your host, sipping on a lovely glass of petrol, the Amy Winehouse of Weinberg, Gabriel Makin. So, gentlemen, I think we're going to start with our guest today. Mike, can you please tell us what you think are going to be some of the most important stories going into next year, especially in terms of what's happening in South Africa?
Hi, Gabriel, and thank you for inviting me to your show. It's an honor to be on this fancy panel. Starting to feel like it's only France and I that couldn't get out of the country. I'm locked here in waterlogged Johannesburg, so I've clearly got, not too exotic to sit here in rainy Parkhurst, but here we are. Gabriel, I wanted to talk about, we into the Christmas season, which is meant to be the middle of our summer. Johannesburg is on top of all of its other problems, having particularly bad weather this summer. So, this might just become a ghost town soon. But, we're into the Christmas season, and we sort of, there's not a lot of news, but we had the ANC NEC meeting recently, about a week or so ago, and there were a couple of interesting things that I noted from here. And obviously, we've got a couple of experts out there, but I'll just give you some of my basic what sort of struck me about what came out of that meeting, and especially what President Ramaphosa had to say. And he's been banging the one drum, which is the same drum that's been banged for about 20 years. I'm starting to feel sorry for the drum, and that is about renewal. Because the ANC sees, and you guys do a lot of polling, sees the fact that nothing it seems to try seems to get their support up. They've tried something quite novel over the last couple of months, and that is to implore their people to do what they're paid to do, especially at local government level. We even had the spectacle of Ramaphosa saying, the DA governs better in the Cape, and perhaps we should learn from them. And that went down very badly amongst ANC members. They tried that again at the NEC meeting, and it didn't work. And I see that he closed the meeting, or subsequently, by pressing hard again on national health insurance and BEE. And it sort of made me realize that as we head towards the local government election, the ANC have got two options when it comes to rekindling their support. One is to try and impress people with their brilliant governance. They tried that, and it's not working. The only other drum that they can bang is ideology. And we are going to get it in absolute chunks. You're going to get NHI, expropriation without compensation. Every single thing that sounds even a little bit radical is going to get pushed non-stop between now and the local government election, in my opinion, because they can't say we govern well. What they can only do is try and bang the Swart Gevaar drum, or the Wit Gevaar drum, I suppose we should call it, and really go and try and get the votes back from the where voters left them for Mkhonto Wesizwe or EFF or something like that, because they're not going to compete. They're not going to contest the election on performance at all. That's what it's starting to look like to me. Just keep on going, say, we want to, take everything from white people, give it to you, therefore vote for us. I'd be very curious to know what the rest of your panel thinks about it, but that's the way it's starting to shape up to me.
Yeah, maybe we go to you, James.
Yeah, I just sort of add in a point is that that messaging appeals to the activists. I mean, an army sort of marches on its stomach, and it's the activists who are the ANC's army, and things like the NHI or expropriation without compensation are essentially a promise of loot. So, stick with the army, and you will be rewarded. I'm not so sure if it appeals very much to voters anymore, because they see the consequences of looting for the in their own lives. So I can see the appeal to the activist space. I can't see particularly the appeal to ordinary voters, but maybe France has a sort of stronger sense of that.
Yeah,
It's a
France.
strange, Mike, James, hi. It's this odd thing about the ANC is that its own history is so instructive. I mean, we've done it 100 times over, but here again. The first decade in government, it's relatively pragmatic. Investments up, growth's up, jobs are up, ANC support is way up, protest levels are way down. I mean, it's on the record. It's unambiguous. They did well. By 2004, they're 6 points stronger than when Mandela led them, a decade previously, into 94. Then they go through the next sort of period. They'll pick up more of these. They were always populist ideas, but they pick up more and more populist ideas, and the consequences of cadre deployment and electricity are now also being fed into the system. And investors are uncertain. We know that because we monitor it on an index, and investor confidence falls by half, and growth falls and jobs fall, and ANC voters start to leave. So just at that level, you can see, hey, when you were doing sensible, pragmatic, centrist things, you were firmly in command. Now you've lost. And then behind that, you mentioned the polls, Mike. These all back it up. There's, inside the ANC camp, roughly, Gabriel knows sometimes better than me these numbers, support for expropriation without compensation splits by a margin of 2-1 against the idea. Our greatest insight was when we ran a tracking poll ahead of last year's elections. And when the ANC started pushing NHI because it felt it was under pressure, it was in the 40s, needed to do something, hype up the rhetoric, we just saw its support tank because poor communities realize what it's like to suffer under public health care, and the aspiration of private health care was being taken away from them. And the National General Council meeting at the end, right, Ramaphosa hammers this stuff again. But it's not universally like that across the party. There are people, key people, important, quite senior, who are far more willing in private to discuss the extent to which the same kind of rhetoric has knocked them down to where they're now polled at below 40%. But for some reason, I tell you, Mike, always it comes from the top, from the union buildings, time and again, and out of Ramaphosa's office especially. Time and again, the same thing gets beaten, and it's the very thing that beat them down. And they mustn't forget it's under his leadership that they dropped 17 percentage points in an election that I still maintain they should never have lost. So, you can try it. You can try this popular stuff again. You're just going to go a hell of a lot lower. than you are already.
Mike?
I just wanted to say that I didn't say it was going to work. There's just no doubt we're going to get flooded with this stuff, purely because they can't get the deployees to go and do their jobs. So, Joburg's a mess, for example. All the paint work has come off from the G20 meeting. Nobody's rushing to repair it. I'm saying we're going to see no performance from local governance, but boy, they're going to ramp up the conversation in the hope that it works this time, which it probably won't.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I've been on your show often. We know this stuff won't work. You see, the thing is, if it let's say it might have worked, it would still have done a lot of damage, but at least you could say, hey, you're onto a strategy that will get you more votes. At least that we can kind of understand. But it doesn't even offer you that. It alienates the vote, drives it towards the center, which is increasingly occupied by the DA. So it's just in the face of all the evidence of 30 years, it doesn't work. And from the top, bang it out again. We're going to do it all over again. It's very distressing, I think, for ANC people who are worried about their futures in the party to see this come out of the top time and time again.
James?
Yeah, France, are you saying that this is actually, it comes from sort of Ramaphosa, that it's sort of, he feels it deeply? Or is it some sort of tactical thing that we just can't sort of make sense of from the outside?
I don't know. I just see a lot around the fringes of senior fringes of the ANC that there's an understanding this doesn't work. There's a good understanding, and amongst, let's say, some past leaders of the ANC, and let's say some retirees from the ANC, and certainly the people that ran the ANC between 94 and around 2008. They understand this as well. I mean, it's not, you don't actually often come across anyone, I'd say. I mean, and there's also, the sample's relatively small because, you've shown up to talk to me, which kind of narrows the sample, I suppose. But I mean, I very rarely come across anyone in the ANC for the last couple of years who would, in private, seriously suggest that any of this stuff could work. The only time we rarely see it trumpeted loudly again is from the top, and I don't know why that is. If there's a belief that it's real, or something else, or if it's an attempt to hold factions together, I don't know what it is, but I don't experience it universally.
Sorry, Mike?
Just a quick one on that. I've sort of interviewed two authors that wrote books that dealt with the negotiations that led to the GNU. One was Tony Leon, the other was Mandy Wiener. And in both cases, they had interviewed a lot of people and they were very close to the process. Obviously, Tony Leon was in the process. And you start seeing some sort of common themes emerge. One of them was that when the ANC were faced with all of the polling that was telling them that they were going to lose their majority, they discussed their various options, and the option they chose is mind-blowing. They chose to disregard the polling. That was their strategy, was to say, oh, well, we won't get less than 50%. Not we'll do this or we'll do that. They couldn't agree on a strategy, so they just decided that it was the polling's fault and decided to opt out of that information. It's bizarre. It's crazy, but they've done it before under Ramaphosa's leadership. I think he's a denialist when it comes to reality, and he's going to deny this again. This animal's going to the same watering hole again. It's crazy. Even though there was a crocodile there the last time, they're going there again.
Yeah. I think that what you say there dovetails very nicely into the next big event that I think we want to address here, and it's related to what we've been talking about, and that is the next local government elections. Because as you, Mike and James and France have all pointed out, the ANC is struggling with a kind of identity crisis at the moment, and a crisis of strategy. What is it going to do? And so, under those conditions, it seems as though the DA is poised to gain from the kind of chaos inside of the ANC. And so, the question is, how influential do we think these local government elections are going to be? Maybe we start with you, France.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big local thing to watch next year in SA. The local government elections will be at the end of the year or early 2027, but that doesn't really matter because very good polling data will become available at regular intervals through the year. So we'll already essentially know the result. We'll have a good idea of the result about halfway into the year. Even at first quarter of the year, we'll have a good sense of it. Now, the thing in those results to watch for me, or the thing I'll watch, is the rural-urban split. Because the ANC is now at 40%. And what matters more than whether it goes to 30%, which it's probably going to do, is what caused it to go to 30%. It's out of the Western Cape. It almost doesn't exist in the Western Cape anymore. So it's done. If it does very badly in Natal and very badly in Gauteng, then it is essentially out of South Africa's urban centers. And that's where the younger, more youthful, aspirant, middle class kind of vote is concentrated. And if in these elections it goes really low in that market, then I think there's enough to say there's no coming back for it. It is over. It will become a rural party. And South Africa's rural voting market is much older. It's certainly not one that's growing. Mortality and immigration have put an end to that. And so it could easily checkmate itself into a position where it's sealed its fate. So that's for me, the top local thing to watch. We'll have a good idea, I'd say as early as the first quarter of the year already, of what's going to happen there. And certainly towards the end of the year, we'll have a very good idea. The ANC's elections head is a guy called him Du and Thuli. And he made this. The thing about the ANC is they're often very good at diagnosing the problem. And I mean, he made this point I've just made to you. He made the point about 10 days ago. He said we risk becoming a rural party, and if that happens, it will be completely fatal. It's not as if things that happen. Yeah, there's a strange denial at the very end, but it's not as if the things that happen are like bolts from the blue that were completely unanticipated. So yeah, I mean and I'll start with that. I've got some estimates for you about what I think is going to happen in the various cities and how that's going to turn out. But yeah, local polls, number one, look for the rural-urban split. If the ANC gets hammered in KZN and Gauteng, can start to say the last rites.
James?
I just wanted to ask if France could also speak on how secure the DA is in Cape Town and the Western Cape with the growing challenge of the Patriotic Alliance.
Well, I sat with some chaps and we tried to work out some numbers as they are now, not as they will be. And they will change because there's a whole year of campaigning, the purpose of which is to make the numbers change. So if nothing changed, let's say everything, the status quo remained, Johannesburg, but it will still change. Let me just stress this before this runs away in the B grade press as some forecast of the future. The DA is going to be around 40, low 40s, or is at the moment. ANC is going to come in somewhere in the 30s. In Pretoria, the DA and the Freedom Front together are going to be in the mid to high 40s. The ANC is going to be in the 30s. In Durban, the ANC, the DA, and the IFP are going to be at almost 50. And MK, with a little help from the EFF, are going to be at almost 50. It's going to be 50-50. Well, that's how it is at the moment. And in Port Elizabeth, the DA is going to be at about, well, at the moment, let's say mid-40s, ANC's in the mid-30s. So the DA's got the edge on them, on the ANC across most of the cities. In Cape Town, the one James asked about, we think the DA gets in just above 50, but it's not assured. The Cape politics some people who've been involved in it say that it's a lot about swinging. It's about swinging the coloured vote. And initially, after '94, the DA, the Nats kind of had the coloured vote, and then the coloured vote decided, nah, it's not for us, and it sort of went to the ANC a bit. And then it decided that's not for us, and the coloured vote moved to the DA a bit. The DA at the Cape. And the point is, the coloured vote doesn't sit still in the Cape. It doesn't. You can't think that it will. And what's been missing in that story is where's the coloured nationalist political platform? Because thus far it's been either we vote for the Nats or for the ANC or for the DA, and strolling onto the scene is the very engaging and in many respects impressive from a political perspective, Gates and Mackenzie. And he starts to play coloured nationalist politics. And I think in the rural hinterland of the Western Cape, he's very effective. I think in the more urbane middle classes, which the coloured community is not the majority, he doesn't do quite as well. So Cape Town might just squeeze in over the line. But in the longer term, James, the DA shouldn't be complacent about its hold on the Western Cape. And the Western Cape will go the way that the bulk of the coloured vote swings. And no one's ever tried a real no one serious has tried the real coloured nationalist thing. And that's now a political option.
Yeah, just on that point of the Mike, I'm coming to you next, but just on that point quickly of the Coloured Nationalist Party, just looking at the demographics of the Western Cape, it breaks. This is roughly about 50% coloured, about 28 to 30% black, 16-ish% white, and then 5% the rest of everyone. And so controlling that colored block literally does define where the majority of the population will vote in the Western Cape. It's very unique in South Africa's context, in which it is the only minority majority province. And that majority minority happens to be the coloureds, not white people in Cape Town.
Yeah. There's this complacency in the Cape. I just want to tell a funny story. There's this complacency in the Cape that the DA governs it, and it's the greatest place on earth, and we're absolutely safe, and we've escaped from, what's in the north. And then sometimes you get invited to talk to these sort of Cape dinners and things, and you can imagine they often very wealthy people, and they don't know the demographics. And you say, the province's demographics splits 50, 30, 20. And you can see they don't know which, and you say to them, you're not the 50, and you're not the 30 either. And then you can see a far more sort of serious sort of mood comes across the room when they realize that there's the Western Cape is also still a political fight. Sorry, I interrupted you both, Gabriel.
To you, Mike.
Yeah, there's a thing that struck me recently. I interviewed somebody from the DA who is involved with finance here in Johannesburg, and I realized, just how utterly, I don't know if they're just poorly advised, if they'd have no, concept, if they don't hear themselves. But the DA does some things that astound me, absolutely astound me. Now, I've had my problems with them because they are the party that should be benefiting from the ANC's poor performance, and yet they're not. And I realized that they're very mouthy, as Trump's spokeswoman would say. They run their mouths quite freely, the DA. One of their sort of slogans is a vote killer, that the DA will fix things. And I'm often, I was sitting here and I was wondering, do they have a concept for what people are hearing when they say they're going to fix things? Because if we take the reality here up country, Johannesburg, Pretoria, and these places, when they say fix things, what a lot of people are hearing is they're going to make you pay for services that you haven't been paying for. And they'll rather live with the potholes than pay their electricity bill at the end of the month. They'll rather live with no street lights than pay for their water that they're getting every day, or their rates. And, the DA never ever says anything aspirational. They always sort of like, they're Karen writing a letter to the manager. And if they go and campaign through this local government election saying the DA will fix things, they're going to get hurt badly, because the economy is bad, people are struggling, and you know what? You very quickly get used to not paying for your electricity bill or your rates, and there's no repercussion in ANC-run places, and people know that. And it absolutely, I'm stunned every time I see these ANC people, these DA people, not being able to, put themselves in the position of the people listening to them. What do they think people are hearing when they say we'll fix things? They think of some rich guy paying his rates, and then suddenly the streets are clean and there's no potholes and all of that. That's fine. But, many of you have been to my studio here in Parkhurst. We can walk around 150 meters from where I am, and there are 3 houses that have jerry-rigged their electricity to the street light. You can see it in open view. Why would those houses vote for the DA? So that somebody can come and take their dodgy connection away? Not a hope in hell. So, at some point, hopefully the DA will start hearing themselves and then campaign differently. It's not to say they mustn't fix these things. It's just saying don't campaign on them. Because what people are hearing is that after all these years of having a free ride, I'm going to have to pay. And that's painful. So, that's my 5 cents worth. I don't think they've got a marketing department. I think they speak to each other in a padded cell. That's what I believe.
Yeah, Franz, maybe do you want to pick up on that theme, because it's something that we have kind of hinted at in the show before, especially about the talking to the aspirations of voters.
Look, I think on the local government stuff, when you were speaking, Mike, I was thinking about Helen in Johannesburg, Zilla. And I think she's been quite good. She's tough. And a lot of people have said over the years, she should tone it down. She alienates people. I think she alienates some elites. But in Joburg, the toughness is certainly coming to the fore as an asset, because I think the hierarchy of needs of voters have shifted to a point where they want. I hear Midrand hasn't had water now for a week, or electricity, or one of the other, or both together. And I think her toughness has worked. And then where she's been, she's been tested by some journalists, and they sort of say, well, what do you do about, I don't know, jobs? She's been very good. She says, local government, we don't do anything about jobs. We can't employ people. She says, all I can do is do the basic things correctly, the streets, lights. Seems to be working. And what I hear from how it's going on literally the campaign trail is that where Zilla is appearing, there are crowds of adoring supporters. I hear it's sometimes difficult to get through a whole dinner because of the number of waiters that are appearing to say how they wish her well. I heard a story about a fire, the Johannesburg Fire Department, some fire station, I think it was that she went to, and how the firemen came out and said openly, I mean, I believe the media was there, said, listen, this is what's going on here, and we need you to win. So I think on the Joburg trail, the way she's landing the message, tough, pretty brutally honest, saying, I'm not going to create millions of jobs, not at local level. I think it's been pretty good. Our great mate Gareth van Onselen, who of Victory Research, who does a lot of the poll work for the Social Research Foundation. Gareth said to me, the thing you need if you want to be successful here is the realistic expectation. You've got to cultivate the realistic expectation in the mind of a voter that if you vote for me, your life will get better and will improve. And I think the Joburg campaign is not far off that.
Richard?
Just I may have raised this before, Franz, but yes, she can't create jobs with local government policies. I mean, that's a much bigger task. But if she wins, can she get rid of all BEE and contracting and hiring and just become more effective and show that as a better model for the future? How much latitude does she have to disregard all that kind of stuff,
I think
all that
I
kind of
think
corrupt BEE stuff?
it's a question of the levels at which you do it. I mean, she's sort of subject to the laws of the country. But now, an interesting conversation I've had with some people over years is young. I can tell you about not young anymore. He's quite prominent now. Black analyst. He said to me once, you're lucky you're white, and you do the work that you do. He says because you have a much easier time with BE and the like. I've never really found it to be much of an issue, but I said, well, how's that? He said, if I get something, a job, whatever, there's this expectation that obviously I'm going to, cut people in on it. But the people you might talk to wouldn't even presume to put that to you. And you're sort of freed of it. And to the extent that, which is a different issue, but not entirely, that BE serves as a kind of fig leaf to conceal rent seeking. I think there's a lot of room for a honest and tough politician to actually just implement. And I think you need to rework the whole policy before this runs away and gets misconstrued. But I think if you just actually implemented BE honestly and properly and tried to, get some small firms in on the thing and didn't stress equity and board places over actual empowerment, I think it could do a bit of good. And I think it would do, certainly on the other side, a lot less damage. So I would say to you, it's a very interesting question that let's say the DA implemented BE, and let's say they did it honestly. So let's just use a few cliches here. I think you might still have BE in the country, and you might actually have a stronger economic performance and less corruption. However, I also hasten to add that if you focused empowerment policy on, I have to add this, otherwise this will be misconstrued. If you focused empowerment policy on, the building blocks of if you rewarded firms for the building blocks of every successful economy, so you won BE points for creating jobs, you won BE points for committing capital, you won BE points for tax payments and for contributions to exports. That's how, if you want to do it, that's the best way to do it. And not the way it's being done. But even the way it's being done, if it was done honestly, might do a little bit of good and would certainly do a lot less damage. And I think there's a lot of room, therefore, for new political lineups in cities to take advantage of this long-winded point that I've now finished making for you. Thank you.
James?
Yeah, a big problem in the past though, has been the the bureaucracy, which is sort of controlled by liberation movement cadres. And if you come in with a sort of a sort of weak plurality, and you can't appoint a good municipal manager, you're just on a hiding to nothing, because you can't even you're not even allowed to influence tenders. So the sort of ANC Liberate EFF blob controls this the controls the tenders, controls the appointments, and you're just sitting in council, and you are you're not you're in office, but you're not in power at all. So it's not just that the ANC has to eke out a small sort of narrow victory; they have to get a mandate to actually be able to appoint proper managers within the municipality.
There's so much money sloshing. That's actually a thing to watch for next year. There's so much money, or an angle from which to look at the local government polls. There's so many billions of rands sloshing around in these cities. It's really applied as a slush fund. That if you knock the ANC majorities way down to where they can't do that anymore, you're going to create a lot of internal tension inside that party. Because everyone can kind of be on the same page as long as the kind of the rent-seeking cash is flowing around, and it's billions that flows around. as soon as you start to, you can imagine in any kind of situation of gangsters, if you cut the money off, the pressure that must be created and then the infighting that begins as a consequence is going to be very great. So it's not just what happens to the ANC voter base, my earlier point on what to watch, I suppose, but also, do these city results actually cut off billions of rands in kind of illicit flows through political networks? And does that trigger a degree of infighting inside those networks that collapses the ANC even faster?
Mike?
Yeah, just one question for you, Frans. I was just thinking about, you gave where the polling is sitting at, and obviously, certainly many of us are heavily focused on Johannesburg, Pretoria, etc., the Gauteng, the upcountry metros. But I was just sitting here thinking about the fact that you said that the DA could be around that 50% level in Cape Town. And I was just wondering, if they've done such a good job in Cape Town, why would their support not have grown? Is South Africa not a country that's sensitive to performance at all in government? What is it that they keep on doing wrong? I mean, I have my views, but why is it that the ANC, that the DA can't govern well in Cape Town, and thereby everybody is so impressed that their margin grows? You said earlier that the ANC was rewarded for good governance back in the day. Why is the DA not being rewarded for good governance, in your opinion?
If you drive from the airport into the Cape Town, the centre of Cape Town, the centre that's now so nice, you can walk to dinner from these excellent restaurants back to where you're staying, and streets are clean, and it's kind of great. But when you drive in from the airport, you see the horror of poverty, these shacks, often these wooden ones, sitting on these kind of sand dunes, half submerged in the water, and it's just hell. And the Western Cape's unemployment rate might be lower than the national average, but it's still 4 or 5 times the global figure. That's just massively horrible for poor people to live in. And the reason for that, or a large part of the reason for that, is that it's the same point of Zilla on the campaign trail. You can control, as the mayor, control as the premier of the Western Cape, certain things. But if you don't have control over taxation policy, if you don't have full control over empowerment policy, if you don't have full control over labor market policy, if you can't exert profoundly great control over the school curriculum, if you can't run the trains, if you have only limited control over policing, then you can't do the big macro things to position your province and the cities within it as highly dynamic, high growth, high investment environments. And so you do what you can, but maybe you could do more. But you're still recording levels of poverty and unemployment that are a multiple of what you'd find anywhere else in the emerging world. And if you're the guy sitting on that shack, I think a good way to think about it, or sometimes when a politician asks me your question, I say to them, and taking in mind that excellent point that Gareth made to me about the expectation, the realistic belief. And I said, if we took 5 people, let's say, or 10 people out of those shacks on the dunes, those terrible ones, and we brought them into this meeting here, let's onto the podcast, and we lined up the opposition politicians, even the very good ones. We said, there you go, there are 10 people, convince them that by voting for you in the next election, they will get out of that shack. Convince them of it. They couldn't do it. And they couldn't do it in part because they don't have control of the national level policies, and South Africa is not sufficiently a federation for them to really develop a competitive investment edge over the other over the other provinces. So I'd say that's probably the bulk of the answer I'd put you.
Would add to that, as someone who's from the Western Cape and Cape Town, I think the larger point you're making, France, is about imagery. That it's very difficult for a voter to see the branches from the trees and to understand what the DA is responsible, what the DA is not responsible for. And the other horrifying image that's constantly played out in Cape Town is the violence in the Cape Flats. That there's essentially a 2 or 3 square kilometer area that sees 80% of Cape Town's like murder, rapes happen in that area. And that violence is horrifying and it's never ending, and it has blighted Cape Town for decades. And the fact that the DA doesn't have the ability to get on top of that is a constant reminder to voters in poorer areas that they are not safe, and that they seem that the DA cannot deliver this kind of safety that they would want, because the shacks that you talk about, they all sit on the border with this literally a war zone. You remember a few years ago when the army was deployed into the Cape Flats. And so there's a real imagery problem that the DA has that is also outside of their control. And
You'll
so keeping
remember
on no, go ahead, France.
That's a point Johan Rupert made quite rudely, I thought, to John Steenhuisen in the Oval Office when John had said the Western Cape is whatever governed better, which absolutely is true. And then Rupert piped up and said to Trump, "No, listen, it's like a war zone where he comes from. It's almost the worst place." in that horribly incompetent meeting that was arranged with President Trump. But it was exactly, Rupert was making the point you make about the violence.
Yeah, so we're going to stay on the theme of the DA for, I think, our last story on South Africa before we shift our attention internationally, and that is that the DA is going to have its leadership election in April of 2026. And the last couple of weeks, we've chatted about some of the troubles that its leader, John Steenhuisen, has faced, and why we think maybe his position is unfairly being tested. But the question is, what happens to the DA with that leadership election, and where does the future of that party lie? So who wants to take a stab at answering this question?
Well, we said last time on the show, the time before, that the DA must just think carefully about John's position. Now, Steenhuisen's under great pressure in the DA. He's had some difficult media and all of that. And we just said, just think through your next step. It's the end of March, I think early April, the DA goes to Congress, it picks a new chairperson, picks a new leader. The importance of that is enormous because let's go to one reason. John and his current crew have been quite strong about the GNU and committed to that. There's no guarantee that, let's say, the DA picks someone else, that that same commitment will be there. At the time the GNU was formed, there was a to and fro in that party about whether to be in or whether to be out. Both sides made good points. So Cyril Ramaphosa, Gabriel made the excellent point on that show where we spoke about this. He said, I think Cyril Ramaphosa's party is going down and he's quite secure, and the DA is going up and John is not secure at all, which I thought was very well put. So the DA, March, April, depending on who it picks, I think there can be a question about with the DA side. At what level of tolerance the DA will have for its coalition partner before it thinks of exiting the GNU, and the importance of that is, of course, absolutely enormous. And so early in the year, that would perhaps be the first kind of political horizon to watch, a domestic South African horizon to watch for 2026.
Mike?
Yeah, this is a sensitive topic for me because, I'm on record as having a problem with John Steenhuisen and I. We're not necessarily the best of mates. Didn't help when I did a piece saying that the DA has a Steenhuisen problem. I think that he is uniquely badly positioned for the time to be the leader of the party. I don't think it would have been a good time, but he's uniquely poorly positioned right now. Where the DA, to me, when I look at the DA, I see the same thing as looking at Springbok rugby before Rassie Erasmus arrived. You've got the biggest pool of talent in the country that's most passionate about the game with the biggest population, blah, blah, blah. You're making a hash of things. You're making a hash of transformation, etc., etc. Like, why do you keep on making your own problems? And I think that the DA keeps on making its own problems. And to me, that just screams to a leadership without any kind of vision. And I'm almost, thinking how much worse anybody, my dog Waldo, how much worse could he do if he was the DA leader? Right? You've got all of these dynamics right. You've got the best policies. You've got a proven track record. You could easily convert this into a party that appeals to everybody. But yet they refuse to go and walk and pick up the pot of gold. It is almost, in my mind, beyond belief that they just refuse to go. It's lying there. They can just walk. It's right there and pick up whatever they like, but yet they refuse to do it. You're talking about even in the Cape Town demographics, 50, 30, 20, and you decide only the 20 can run the city. I am saying it's laughable. It's crazy. It's madness. We live in South Africa and you've got to face certain realities. And you've got to be a party that appeals to everybody. Their policies appeal to everybody. They've got nobody there who can explain that to people, least of all President Ramaphosa's white minister. So I think that he is uniquely badly placed. And I can't even think of anybody who could do a worse job, because he's doing a non-job, and sometimes a non-job is worse than a bad job. He's kind of like Harold Macmillan at the start of the Second World War, uniquely poorly positioned to be in that position. You have to find your Winston Churchill. In the case of the DA, they have to find somebody that you want to have a beer with, not a Big Mac. He's not a serious guy. He's not a politician who thinks. He is a guy who writes strongly worded letters. And South Africa is in a country that needs an arm around the shoulder. We don't need to be scolded by the opposition. Somebody thought it was a good idea to blame voters, for example. Oh, you get the government you vote for. We've got the government. You guys explain to us why you're better. They can't even do that in Cape Town. So I'm just saying that this is the opportunity for the DA. Let's put it this way. It's like trying to teach somebody to drive and they've been in second gear for too long. And you're sitting in their passenger seat and you want to say, for God's sakes, put it into third gear at least. Let's hope whoever they get will be able to see this, put the car into third gear. They've got almost 100% of the Indian vote. They couldn't find one position for an Indian cabinet minister. Not one. They're based in the Western Cape. They couldn't find one coloured minister to put in as a cabinet minister. Now, if you say that to Helen, she's going to come back with an easy answer. Oh, do you want us to window dress? No, we want you to develop talent. That's really what we want you to do. So they frustrate me beyond belief because they could be the Springboks. They could make a joke of these elections if they just had some leadership. So I know, France, you and I may disagree. I think this is their opportunity. And anybody, in my opinion, almost anybody could do a better job. And if you find somebody who does a worse job, that's fine. Somebody else will pick up that position that they don't want to seem to take of being the party with the best policy. Somebody will come up. That's my very strong opinion on this particular topic.
France?
I don't disagree with Mike. I think on the talent development questions and the like and the missed opportunity, I think that is right. I'm just cautious about, in the midst of a thing, fraught, lots of hostile media, lots of silly allegations flying around of throwing out a leader. And not, it's a bit like the question I put to people before the election last year that come past and they'd say we must defeat the ANC, and they wanted to donate money to see how this could be best be done by, giving it to Rise Mzansi, sure to take the ANC down. And I said to them, okay, who would you who would you replace it with if it lost? Let's say it lost way support. Who would you put in? And they didn't know. And I said to them, just be very careful about what you wish for. And I think on the current leadership in the DA as well, just be cautious. Mike's speech was excellent now that he just made. Very good. I was sitting there wondering, how am I going to answer this one? But I think my answer would be just think through, move strategically. If there's a leadership development problem, let's address that as a leadership development problem, systematically, carefully, on its own. The ANC's always been quite good at this, about not letting, and later it caused damage to it, not letting third parties dictate its behavior to its detriment ultimately. But it's not a political rule. So I wouldn't do anything rash at this point because they are up a bit. They are in the government, and I think a point maybe James will make a point on too is in being quite not accommodating, perhaps accommodating of the ANC. There's one advantage to that, in that the two sides, the ANC and the DA must work together for the country to hold together as a unitary whole. That's my argument, because the ANC will bring the aspirant middle class vote with the urban fringe, and the DA the established middle class out of suburbia. There's no other party that can do that. So they can do both those things at once, not at the moment. So they need to work together. And in the fact that the DA is criticized for having gone along quite slowly with the ANC, carefully, it has helped to establish that relationship, which I think strategically, in the long term for SA, is a very good thing. Because if those two parties could not work together, had the DA gone flying in and forced ideas that the ANC found difficult to live with, and the deal broke up, then the union of South Africa will fail, which isn't a problem for the wealthy, because we'll just all go live in enclaves, as many of us already do. But the union of SA won't hold, and the prospect for getting millions of people out of poverty is much easier done with South Africa remaining a unitary whole than the country collapsing into the Balkans.
So, Mike, I'm going to go to you, and then after that, I will need to move the discussion to the international stage. But, Mike, your last word on this?
Yeah, just a quick one. France, are you suggesting that somebody else wouldn't have done what's happened so far? I mean, I'm trying to work out where this great Machiavellian moment has been that the leadership of the DA has followed. They're in the GNU. We know that the options were shit, so we chose the less of the shit options, like big wank. We all knew it was going to happen. Like, I'm saying that the deal was done. I don't think it's been handled particularly well. I don't think the DA is one thing nor the other. I just don't see what's been added here that a leadership change now would upset. Who would be in the party that would go and stuff it all up? I don't see that person. I don't see how that could happen. Let's rather put it that way.
I think that had the DA and the ANC not gotten together last year, and let's say the EFF or the MK, EFF, ANC had got together, and there'd been no kind of moderate input, no handbrake, brakes had failed. It's possible that where we'd be today is in a situation where we were implementing some degree of EWC. That precedent was being applied to the healthcare sector, and South Africa's private healthcare was under threat, which meant the country can't hold a middle class. The budgeting might have been reckless. We might have printed money and had very high rates of inflation. Our foreign policy might have leapt to an even more radical extreme. Remember, I sort of spend a lot of my life as a sort of risk person for talking to corporates about things. And I think that it's remarkable that that didn't happen. I mean, it really should have. And the ANC really should, I mean, if you just at a sort of superficial level, it really should have gone along with its old comrades. The both splinters, the EFF and MK, they should have all got together. They should have done something really militant, a real sort of Africanist, nationalist, revolutionary drive in the hope that the economic collapse that would follow would have the effect of deepening poverty very quickly. And if you deepen poverty very quickly, you'll create a lot of anger. And if you're good politically, you'll turn that anger to your advantage. You'll blame what's left of the relative middle classes. And as you drive them out of the country, well, it wouldn't only have been a few Afrikaners lining up at the refugee center, now raided refugee center in Pretoria, the American one. And there might not have been a way back. And I think that the collective of the political leadership, both the DA side, flawed as it might be, I think the DA could do a lot of things that it doesn't do. And on the ANC side as well, which actually took an active decision not to do this, they put the country in a position where the Union, the old 1910, the two colonies and the two Boer republics, that Union might still hold together. Had they not have done that, the Union would now be fragmenting properly. It would be breaking up into Balkans. Balkans always hostile to each other. And so, and it's not that I haven't had some serious disagreements with some of the key people we're talking about this afternoon. Believe me, some very serious ones. But I think my advice is just at this moment we're in a position where the national whole can still work. We can solve the problem from here. In the same way, the ANC must make rash decisions now and throw out Mr. Ramaphosa as damaging as he's been for that party. DA mustn't take rash decisions now. Those two, for whatever their critics wish to say about them, have actually left the country a year after this amazing election. Amazing in the sense that it's a peaceful transition of power as a post-colonial African government, which really is quite a rare thing, in a position to fix the country as a whole in the fullness of time. And I'd bank on that now. I'd take that and bank it, all the flaws notwithstanding. That's my point. Not that I disagree with any. I don't think that you've made any points or of fact here that I would say Mike is wrong. They did brilliantly on this or they did brilliantly on that. The growth rate is 1%. They haven't done well on that sort of score. So yeah, that's Gabriel.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'd love to keep this conversation going, but we do need to turn our attention internationally. But maybe what we can agree to, Mike, is that you'll come on to the show again later in 2026, so that we can see where both you and France stand a few months down the line. But thank you very much to Richard. You've been waiting incredibly patiently. So we're going to come to you because, Richard, you're going to be telling us about a country that has an outsized influence on the fate of South Africa, it feels, and that is the United States. So, Richard, what are the things we should be paying attention to in the US next year?
Yeah, thanks, Gabriel. Well, Mike already raised Harold Macmillan. And before I say anything, we should remember what he said when he was asked about his government's agenda and what would drive his agenda. And he said, events, dear boy, events. So who knows what's coming down the pike? But and predictions are always hard, but there are some things we should be looking out for. And I think perhaps the most important that's going to dominate next year here are the midterm elections coming up in November 2026. Every 2 years, the entire House of Representatives is re-elected, and a third of the Senate is re-elected. So there are 100 senators, so 33 Senate seats are up. Plus, there are another couple of special elections, I think in Florida and maybe North Carolina. Everybody expects the House. The Republicans at the moment, I think, just have a 2-seat majority, a very slim majority in the House. They've got a healthier, but maybe I think a 3 or 4-seat majority in the Senate. But everybody expects, given the polling, that the Republicans will lose control of the House of Representatives. That normally happens in midterm elections. Whoever people voters tend to protest and come out against the party that occupies the White House. But the unfavorability. I was just looking up here on my iPad. The unfavorability for Trump is rising, and its favorability is decreasing and unfavorability is increasing, and that is true of the Republican Party too. Trump started out this year, I think we discussed this in the last episode, Trump started out this year with high favorability, mostly because he dealt with the border problem. But then he hit us with Liberation Day, with the border taxes, with the tariffs. And since then, the United States has lost more than 67,000 manufacturing jobs. The reason that Trump is unpopular is because his policies are not helping ordinary people, working people. Losing jobs, inflation is not under control, and for that reason, we've seen in whatever elections there have been recently, Democrats romping home and beating Republicans, even in places where Republicans should have dominated, and even electing radicals like Zoran Mamdani in New York. So I think, with that unfavorability, we're going to see over the next year a continued fraction. We talk a lot about the horseshoe of the far left and the far right coming together, meeting in the middle with policies that, frankly, I abhor. I think Republicans are going to try to spend the year figuring out how to get elected and maybe embracing some of these increasingly statist, dirigiste economic policies, claiming to be helping the working man, and the Democrats doing the same thing. So this is going to be I predict a bad year for Republicans in the House, but also a bad year for those of us who want to see less government interference, makes more economic freedom, a limited role for government. I think we're going to see some bad policies both in the left and the right coming down the pike. That said, I think there is a move already in Congress. It's kind of faltering, but maybe over the next year there might be some attempts, something to watch at healthcare reform. We've been living with Obamacare for many years now, and it has only made healthcare more expensive and more out of reach. And there is now a desire, I think, that is emerging on both sides to do something to fix this. What that means is embracing more market-based solutions to healthcare problems. There's a great graph out there. And this is a slight diversion before I get back to my predictions for this coming year. There's a great graph put up by an economist called Mark Perry. I think it was at the University of Michigan. And it shows this divergence. I think he calls it the graph of the century. On those consumer goods and services that have become more expensive and those that have become less expensive. And consumer goods like TVs and cars have not only become much cheaper, they've become a lot better. And everything that's become more expensive, whether it's healthcare, housing, and education, those are the 3 areas where that have become more expensive, and in some cases worse, like education, are those areas that are most heavily regulated by the government. Everything that is less regulated has become cheaper and better. Everything that is more regulated has become more expensive, and in some cases worse. And I think there is a sort of growing recognition of this, certainly with healthcare. So I think there's a small chance that we might see some good healthcare reforms, but electorally, not a good year to be a Republican. Another couple of things to look out for. We have some major Supreme Court decisions that'll come down the line. I thought that in December already we would have a decision on the big tariffs case, on whether or not Trump's tariffs are constitutional, relying on his emergency powers. That hasn't come down yet, and I'm not sure that there is time. I haven't looked at the Supreme Court's website today before Christmas for that to come down. But that's going to be a big decision. Another the question that everybody expects the Trump administration to lose that decision. It might be a narrow one, but it seems like he will lose. The question is, will Trump seize that opportunity and get rid of the tariffs that have been so damaging to our economy, particularly to the manufacturing sector, and change policies? And maybe that will set him up. Maybe that we'll see some improvements in Trump's favorability that might mean less of an electoral loss, certainly in the House of Representatives. I don't think I've finished that point on the Senate. It seems like the Senate will most likely remain in Republican hands, by the way, because the Republicans have a far more favorable election map coming up. So sorry, to tariffs. Another issue will be this case called Trump v. Slaughter, or Slaughter v. Trump, which will basically determine the president's ability to fire at will agency heads, particularly for these independent agencies, so-called independent agencies. These are sort of New Deal agencies like the Federal Trade Commission and the Securities and Exchange Commission that are supposed to be independent and are supposed to be kind of immune from politics, but in fact are really tools of economic policy. They are not independent, and they have an enormous regulatory footprint on the economy. Most conservatives, me included, think that the president should have more power over these agencies that are political in nature and have an enormous regulatory stranglehold on the economy. So I had lunch yesterday with someone who's kind of clued in and thinks that maybe the Supreme Court is holding the tariffs decision because the tariffs decision could come down unfavorable to Trump, but the Slaughter decision, which if there are any Supreme Court nerds out there, this would overturn a 1930s decision called Humphrey's Executor. If that happens, that's favorable to Trump, and they might try and, given the politics of this, try and pair these two decisions, give something to Trump with one hand and take away with the other. So that's another big decision. Related to that, really, will be the new Federal Reserve chair that will be, I think, announced in January, and there's a lot of sort of jockeying for positions there. It's likely that whatever decision comes down on the appointments power and overturning Humphrey's executor, it could well exclude the Federal Reserve from that, making sure that is more of an independent agency. But it's likely that whoever Trump appoints as the chairman is going to be more open to political interference when it comes to setting interest rates, and that obviously will have a big impact on the economy and also globally. And the way in which we see the Federal Reserve and the dollar as the world's reserve currency will have huge implications for us here and internationally. So those are some things I'm looking at. What else? Internationally, who knows what happens with the Abraham Accords? I hold out great hope that these get expanded. There's already signs that this will happen. Again, events, dear boy. Who knows what happens and how the Islamists try to stymie the normalization of relations between Israel and other countries. But I hold out hope that maybe Saudi Arabia and other Muslim majority countries start normalizing relations with Israel, and we see an improvement there. What other things? I think that'll do for now. France, I think you'll jump in.
Yeah, when you explain to people who don't sort of live just up the road from Capitol Hill, what does it mean for the Trump legacy if the Republicans lose the House next year?
Well, it becomes much more difficult to pass legislation, but then they haven't been doing much of that anyway. For a long time, this is a bipartisan problem for many, many years, where the the Congress doesn't really do its job. It passes these omnibus bills, big spending bills, that never really wants to take any hard decisions. So for Trump's legacy, I think largely his legacy has been built on executive orders, and less on legislating. There might be a chance. So remember, the elections are only in November next year. So he has got most of 2026 to try and achieve something while he has a slim majority. And we look at Obamacare as being Obama's major legacy, the one that he would look upon favorably. I don't share that view. There might be an opportunity to do something big on healthcare, and so that might be a legacy. But I don't think that Trump looks to Congress for his legacy. He looks to his own executive orders and his kind of more strongman style. If in 2027, if Republicans lose the House of Representatives, I will see going forward for the rest of his 2-year term, ongoing investigations, maybe some impeachments, and a Democratic-controlled House of Representatives doing everything that they can to stymie Trump's agenda. But he can still carry on in the mode of Barack Obama, doing executive orders and ignoring Congress.
He hasn't had great numbers into the end of the year. The US jobs report numbers are out, unemployment lifted to, well, by South African standards, it lifted, brace yourselves, to 4.6%, which is a very serious problem. And but the most and inflation is up too, so you have both at the same time. Raina, who's sometimes on the show with us, she's got a great piece tomorrow where she quotes Heather Long, who's an economist at the Navy Federal Credit Union, who says the US is now in a jobs recession. The stagflation term's being thrown around, but the most damning number Raina has from a Trump perspective is a CNBC survey, which found that 41% of Americans this week say they're going to spend less on the holidays than a year before because of cost pressures. Yeah. So that's a damning end to the year for Trump's broader economic policy agenda.
Absolutely. And I think I've said this point before. Trump was reelected because people remembered that in his first term, over those 4 years, everybody felt richer. The poor got richer faster, but everybody got richer. That is not happening now. And it's largely happening because of Trump's policies. He has an opportunity to change them. I don't know that he will.
James?
What about this massive investment that's gone into AI? Has that sucked investment out of the sort of real economy? And AI is potentially a big jobs killer, so that also hurts the average American. So is that having a negative effect on the mood of the country and people's attitude to Trump?
I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced that AI is a jobs killer. In fact, I think it would create different jobs. We've seen this increase in unemployment and decline in manufacturing, and yet economic growth overall hasn't been that bad, and you've seen the stock market going through the roof. That's largely AI driven, and everybody's wondering this is a bubble. The one area where we have seen AI at the moment affecting the economy is in energy prices. Electricity is more expensive now because of the huge demand, and we haven't been able to catch up with production yet. It takes a long time to build to expand electricity supply. So that may be an area. I'm not convinced that it's translated through. Everybody talks about AI, but I don't think it's really filtered down through to the economy and hurt manufacturing yet. I think that the jobs loss has been because of the huge uncertainty that Trump has caused himself by these border taxes, by tariffs that go up and down based on what mood he wakes up in the morning. And if you are, I'm not a businessman, but if I were running a business and I had no idea whether my input cost tomorrow would be 50% higher or 60% higher or 10% lower, I'm going to be far less reluctant to start expanding, and that's what we're seeing. And I think this is what's causing the economic problems and his favorabilities going through the floor.
Mike?
Richard, I just want to find out, because Trump seems to be committed to his misadventures in Venezuela. How's that going down with the American public? I mean, up until now, what I love about America, I think this is their 4th or 5th draft dodger in a row that always talks tough, right? And yeah, you got a guy who promised no more wars, and he's gone out and provoked one and sent the biggest aircraft carrier in the history of since Star Trek. What's the American appetite for a war in Venezuela, which he seems determined to have?
There's not much of an appetite for that, but these kinds of things don't really filter down through to electoral politics. So you have people, I think rightly, in Congress saying, if we're going to war, Congress reserves the right to declare war. It's not up to the president, and this is not covered in his existing war powers. So it's hard to say. I don't think this is really filtered down. It's been quite sort of distant. I think overall, most people are kind of in favor of this kind of limited thing. I have a problem with it, by the way, with just blowing up these boats in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. But it doesn't seem to have affected. It hasn't filtered down because it hasn't happened yet. Really, I mean, this has been so distant that no soldier really is in harm's way. And I don't think at the moment, I don't think anybody believes that Trump is actually going to send troops into Venezuela. What I think this could do is if Maduro doesn't step down, if something doesn't change there, and if Trump sort of slowly withdraws, this I think will make people wonder how credible the United States is as a world force. If we can't even do that with this huge show of force, and yet a tin pot dictator like Maduro, sitting on a failed state, isn't intimidated. I think that maybe next year will start to filter down and embarrass Trump. Americans don't like being embarrassed, and that might worsen his favorability. Of course, if Maduro does disappear and Trump helps to usher in the rightful democratic rulers in the democratically elected politicians in Venezuela, then that will be a huge advantage. So he's playing a risky game here, but it isn't filtering through yet into elections.
Yeah, let's stay on that theme of Trump's role in the world. And Richard, you mentioned the potential expansion of the Abraham Accords, which obviously was a foreign policy developed in Trump 1.0. And obviously, Trump 2.0's kind of major achievements have really been on the foreign policy front. But the biggest question, I think, next year in terms of Trump's foreign policy is going to be what happens in Ukraine. And we're seeing, a lot of jockeying back and forth. And we had an episode in which we gave some context about the first initial proposed peace deal. There's been many iterations, much has happened since then. But on that episode, our resident Russophile was not with us. And so, Franz, I'm going to hand it to you to tell us about what the chances of peace in Europe are looking like for next year.
Well, I think much better. I think this year has already been very positive in the sense that the intensity of the wars ground down to a degree of a stalemate. I think the Americans have made it plain to the Europeans that the war is fundamentally not sustainable. There is now a firm peace deal on the ground. And I think the missing ingredient is appropriate assurances to the Russians that their interest and security will not be threatened by NATO and the West. And that's not the way that I think a lot of people have seen this conflict over time. But my take of it actually accords very closely with that of Mr. Ramaphosa, the ANC, and the Russians themselves, that Russia was afforded assurances after the fall of the Berlin Wall that NATO would not expand aggressively to the east. Those assurances were broken every single time. Ahead of what is called the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there'd been a vast buildup of Ukrainian regulars in the east. They were going to try and push across and cut off the Crimea and the Russian port at Sevastopol, and Russia acted preemptively to prevent that, triggering a horrific conflict. And therefore, the way out of it is to you need essentially de-armed Ukraine without an avenue to NATO membership. Otherwise, from Moscow's perspective, the security threat is simply too great to do a deal. And they don't have to do a deal because of the quite terrible warning of Putin's to the Europeans that you will run out of Poles before I run out of Russians in this war, which is why the conflict should never have started. And I'm not alone in this view. I mean, before he died, Henry Kissinger had the same view, essentially, that this conflict should never have been allowed to commence. It should have been concluded on the lines of the historical Minsk Accords, which is near enough to where the battle lines now have been drawn. And I think so I think we've taken a huge step toward peace this year in Europe. In addition to achieving peace in the Middle East, our calls to clients had been Trump will achieve peace in Europe and the Middle East. He's done brilliantly in the Middle East, building on his first term's Abraham Accords. And I think we'll see further progress towards peace. The only thing holding it up now is European intransigence to providing the security guarantees that Russia requires. And if they are fed up at that, it is only because of their actions that this devastating and horrible conflict was triggered in the first place. They're going to have to climb down on it because they just don't have the weapons, the manpower to sustain the offensive without American support.
Richard?
Yeah, I don't want to dive into this, and as you know, I've got to jump off in a minute. France coming closer to home. Trump has also been involved in some African conflicts, but at the same time, we see in Nigeria and in Mozambique, close to home for you, rising Islamism. Do you see? What would if you were to advise the Trump administration on what to do about this? What would your message be on securing better ties with Africa, especially as we have the G20 coming up, and South Africa has been shown the middle finger?
Well, the advice is this, that you must redefine your relationship with Africa away from the old oppressor-oppressed narrative, which you can't get out of. And the more you sort of try and apologize for that, the more you compound it. And you can change that into a values narrative between the sort of, on the one hand, the sort of Western Judeo-Christian ethic, matched against the absolute surge in jihadist activity across the continent. You know, there are things called terror threat indices. They measure your extent to which you're at threat of terror attacks. And many African countries now have index scores higher than the old Middle Eastern staples. The displacement of ISIS out of the Middle East saw this take roots in Africa to a great extent. There are lots of Christians, vast numbers, who are killed in the most horrible ways every year. Their churches burnt down. So I think there's a real opportunity here for the US to build a new relationship with Africa by stressing that, which the Trump administration has begun to do. But also, just from a South African perspective, people think America's relationships with Africa are bad. No, they're not. They're often very good. They've just done the peace deal. I mean, there's still some fighting, but they've done the peace deal in the DRC that the South Africans couldn't pull off after they were defeated, captured their garrison, held as prisoners of war by the Rwandans, who had the generosity of spirit to release the South Africans again. I believe people think that only happened once. My understanding is it happened twice. The first time they were privately let go, but they didn't learn the lesson. So I think America's relationships with Africa broadly are much better than the relationship with South Africa. And on my list of things to watch for next year is the US-South Africa relationship, which became so very difficult this week. Again, perhaps a new level of difficulty after South African authorities arrived at a refugee processing center run by the Americans and detained some of the Kenyan staff for what were apparently visa violations. And in fact, South Africans used the term that the Kenyans have self-deported, which I'm sure they thought was very amusing to use the immigration in ICE, the South African version of ICE, descended on the US Immigration Center and apparently found them wanting on immigration law. And but of course there was more to it than just that. Fortuitously they found them wanting on immigration law. So the relationship with South Africa, and the South Africans are really good at this revolutionary stuff. And Richard's point when he was talking about now Venezuela, if the Maduro regime stands up to the largest sort of aircraft carrier since the sort of Enterprise, the message that will send into the rest of the world is the US is weak and feeble. The South Africans, I assure you, they are reading this thing with absolute precision and drawing a bead on that. And on that too, I'm afraid, on the Trump side, we spoke on a show, the last show, the one before, about the record Chinese goods trade surplus in the face of American tariffs. That's a statement that says to Americans, you are weak and we have beaten you. We haven't only survived your tariffs, we've hit a record, a surplus in the year of the tariff. And while you're struggling with 4.6% unemployment, inflation, and 41% of Americans are going to spend less on their holidays now. A lot there. The broader American relationship with Africa is pretty good, but the South Africans are. I wonder if I think the South Africans are starting to feel this weakness on the American side here. And that's going to steel their resolve to continue pressing against the Americans, including acts as audacious as this raid earlier this week on the US refugee processing center.
Perfect. Well, on that note, I think we're going to do a quick look at the rest of the West, and then we are going to wrap this. And so, James, I think in combination with you and I, but I'll go to you first, we should talk a little bit about what is going on in the important things to watch in Europe. So what is important to you?
Well, I suppose the Russia-Ukraine issue is going to be big next year, as France mentioned. So it raises the question of whether Europe is going to start behaving seriously. What was so noticeable about the Russia-Ukraine conflict is Europe was very sort of anti-Russia, obviously very pro-Ukraine, anti-Russian, very sort of tried to present a very sort of hartigheid sort of stance on the conflict, but at the same time never sort of made any hard choices to sort of give substance to that. The classic case right at the beginning of the conflict was Germany carried on closing down its nuclear power stations to satisfy the Greens. You're in a major strategic conflict and you're still running after crazy net zero sort of things that will achieve nothing. So, is Europe, with America sort of withdrawing its strategic support slowly with Russia as this great threat, is it actually going to start, are these countries and these leaders going to start behaving seriously? Another question is the sort of what could be sort of termed sort of a kind of pendulum politics that is taking hold, whereby voters feel that whoever's in power is not looking after their interests, and so they, the voters swing from one extreme to the other, which you've seen in America a bit. You vote one bunch of scoundrels in, they ignore your interests, so then you vote the other extreme. Is the sort of center in Europe going to actually sort of start looking at seriously addressing the interests of their population again? And there's sort of signs pointing in both directions.
Mike?
Yeah, sorry, just to sort of cut in there, just one of the things on the Russia-Ukraine situation. Am I the only one that's see something a little bit different happening? Now, here, if France is your Russophile, I'm your Russophobe. But suddenly it seems like, to me, perhaps Russia's been caught with the old slap rim over here, by the Ukrainians, into believing that this war was nearly over. And just in the last couple of days, we've seen Ukraine make some very definite hard strikes into Russia. Hard strikes. There's no doubt that Russia felt that this war was over. You've got Trump, his son-in-law and his golf partner shining, Putin's helmet. And in the meantime, this is far from over. Russia's bankrupt. They've got a huge economic problem. And now they've let their guard down militarily. Am I the only one that says, hang on a second, just 6 months ago, Ukraine were fighting strongly. They go quiet, which, to my mind is always a red flag in the military when your opponents go quiet. If they're not completely beaten up, they're fucking planning something. And, the next thing it sort of comes out like this, I just wonder, to what degree Russia is invulnerable at the moment. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
I don't think on the balance of who's vulnerable, it's the Russians. The Ukrainians need vast injections of external resources. They're about $100 billion short now, I think, of what they need for next year. And they don't have that for them to sustain the fighting. So they're dependent on third parties to keep them in this fight. And if that enthusiasm for that wanes, they're done. Whereas Russia's in a much stronger position in that it can largely resource itself in order to continue fighting, and it's got resources that third-party countries want, that it's able to sell to them. So I think that's that same point in that Putin quote. That's such a frightening one, that you'll run out of the Poles before I run out of Russians. And it's where this conflict's about who's got the long-term staying power. The Kiev's allies are chiefly Western liberal democracies. With people who vote, they go tired of war, they go tired of the bloodletting, they find new objectives, they eventually, their interest is drawn to something else. They get fed up when they see how much of their own taxpayer money is going into this. None of those disadvantages attach to Putin's position on the conflict. So I think, you can have, a few strikes here, a few strikes there. You can capture a town on the front and lose it again and back and forth. But this is really an accounting of resources and the ability to bring them to bear on the war. And Russia's much more strongly positioned to do that, I think, than is the case for Ukraine.
I think that's a great place to wrap the discussion on Russia-Ukraine, and I think generally the whole discussion, but I just want to raise a last little point to further talk about what James was talking about, the pendulum politics in the West and in Europe. And just so that the viewers are aware, there are elections across Europe next year. There's kind of always elections going on in the various democracies in Europe, but the ones to watch are some local and I think federal level elections in Germany, some local elections in the UK. France has its parliamentary and Senate elections, and Denmark has its presidential elections. And why I pick out those countries is that in Germany, it's going to be interesting to watch. Now, we had an election in which the AfD seemed to be in the lead right up until the end, and the Christian Democrats managed to win that election. But the AfD has continued to garner more and more support after that election, and so to what degree will this support filter out into these election results is a big question. Obviously, in the United Kingdom, we are watching whether or not reform is able to continue its momentum and pick up more local council seats and to be able to govern on the local level to give voters the sense that they are actually a real political force. And in France, we're going to see a referendum on Macron, who's been benighted this year with a terrible economic performance and a incredibly unpopular um, series of prime ministers and collapsing governments. And so, will any sort of stability come to French politics? And finally, Denmark. Denmark is what I think of as one of the most interesting case studies in Europe that no one knows about because they're one of the only countries that had pursued an aggressive border policy from the outset of the Syrian refugee crisis and the broader refugee crisis that Europe has faced since 2015. And as a result of the kind of center right holding fast, the Danish have not kind of introduced into their society a lot of the social problems that have been introduced into the rest of Europe by the mass income of illegal immigrants. And so, where does their politics go when you don't have these social pressures? And what does it kind of gives you a vision of what an alternative European politics could look like had the leaders only seen the sense that the Danish had seen right from the start. So those are the very big events that will be happening in the rest of the West. And so on that note, I would like to thank my panel for this week's episode, and a special thanks to Mike. As I mentioned in the start, he is the founder and host of the wonderful State of the Nation podcast, and also the Political Insider podcast, both of which are linked in the description below. Please go and show Mike as much love as you possibly can. And then thank you to everyone at home for listening today to today's episode. If you are looking for more common sense content, you can find it on our website at thecommonsense.co.za, where we don't just go into politics and economics. We talk about culture, lifestyle, family, everything you could possibly want. So that's thecommonsense.co.za. I've been Gabriel Makin, and this has been Making Sense.